Welcome, this is To The Root podcast, brought to you by Transitions of Indiana and We Grow Hair Indy, where we get to the root of hair restoration solutions, navigating hair loss, embracing life's journey, and everything in between. Welcome back to the podcast. Last week we talked with Kevin Bowen, who had his artist robotic FUE procedure at We Grow Hair Indy. Today we're welcoming back our surgeon, Dr. Farhan Contractor. Good to see you again, Dr. Contractor.
Likewise, thank you for having me again.
A great discussion today, great topic, guys. We're talking about medical tourism and, of course, primarily Turkey.
Yeah.
The rise of and commoditizing of hair transplantation. We've spoken about this. You've got a really unique story and perspective around this. Just elaborate us all a little bit about that.
I'm so glad that you brought me in to speak about this topic, because I know there's a doctor out in Wisconsin who has an opinion on Turkey and has never even been to the Statue of Liberty, let alone across the Atlantic Ocean. I've been to Turkey. I've been to Istanbul. I've seen how those hair restoration clinics run. My experience in Istanbul was very unique. If you want the best baklava in the world, let's go to Istanbul. If you want to have the most amazing gyros, I'll say this carefully because I'm sure some of our Greek patients won't be happy about this, but if you want to have some amazing lamb, let's go to Istanbul together. But when it comes to having a medical procedure done in another country, I would recommend anyone proceed with caution.
Yeah, because and risk is a strong word, but the reality is this is still a medical procedure.
Well, it is a risk, and that's the most appropriate word. You know, I oftentimes encounter folks who just very casually say, oh, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? I'm like, well, based on the photos that I'm constantly getting from friends of friends in Pakistan who are sending me of chunks of hair missing from the back of their head or blisters growing in their scalp, there are some serious concerns. And again, look, any medical procedure can carry risk. But generally, when I see patients that come from other clinics in the U.S., the story almost always goes the same way. I went to so-and-so plastic surgeon in Miami or Beverly Hills, and they promised me the world, and I didn't get much growth. Well, look, okay, I'm sorry, sometimes medical procedures don't work, and that's something that people don't want to talk about. It's a medical procedure. There are factors that are beyond our control, and unfortunately, sometimes they don't work. However, in almost all of those cases, given that the surgeons in the U.S. are generally cognizant of donor management, which just seems to go out the window in other countries, I'm able to go in there and give these guys a second shot. It's very important that you just don't blow all your donor in one shot, because you won't be left with any other options. And that's the story that you and I see time and time again.
Yeah. And it's really interesting, and you can speak more to this with personal experience, the psychology around decision making, and I think the stress of having hair loss. We can have people consult with us and we can talk about how here's what we can do, here's what we can't do. People may agree with us on some of those things, but still in their mind they think there's something better or there's something else. And sometimes it's not the right decision. Everybody,
especially when it seems to come to hair loss, you know, like you said, there's a certain psychology behind it. And I understand, you know, while I have what appears to be a full head of hair, I've experienced hair loss in the past, and that in itself has made me very apprehensive. I can't imagine how I would feel if I was in Norwood's 4. I'm sure my thought process would be somewhat cloudy when I'm trying to achieve a certain goal, a certain aspiration, especially when the marketing from some of these places is just so unbelievable. It's hard to resist.
Yeah, and you have a great story, a very close friend, and as a commitment to your art, you actually went to Istanbul, right? You observed a hair transplant in process. Talk to us about that. Tell us that story.
Yeah, I mean, it was very interesting. My buddy, who I love very much, he's like a brother to me, he came to me and he said, hey, Farhan, look, you know, my crown still bothers me quite a bit, and I want you to do a procedure. I evaluated his scalp. He'd already had 2 previous strip procedures, and I felt like he'd had a very good outcome from it. And as a surgeon, after you have done so many procedures, there comes a point at which you can look at someone and say, look, you've achieved the pinnacle.
Donor area management, right?
That's exactly right. And when I was looking at his donor, first of all, there weren't many hairs, and the hairs that were there were very, very fine. And, you know, I'm extremely experienced in the realm of FUE. I told him, at most, I'll be able to get a couple of 100 grafts out of the back of your scalp. I don't think it's worthwhile for you to pursue a procedure. So what does he do? He goes online and finds a clinic in Turkey that guarantees him that he's going to get 6,000 grafts.
Did you have a discussion with him when he first came to you and told you he had done that? Like, how did that go? Like, how was that chat when he came to you and said, hey, Farhan, I think I'm going to go to Turkey, man?
it's the same experience that you have when any patient comes to you and mentions these sort of things. You have to be very gentle with them, because again, one of the things that motivates me in life is to be able to give someone a sense of hope. So as a surgeon, I need to also be very careful not to destroy someone's dream. Okay? And I did very gently try to explain to him, look, I don't realistically think that this is going to be attainable. I try to tell him as nicely as possible. I don't think there's going to be a substantial improvement. And in the back of my mind, I'm also thinking to myself, I pray to God that you don't have a complication.
Right.
So ultimately, he was dead set on going to Turkey and having
Because
this procedure
it's
done.
not just about the hair transplant, is it? It's about the process around it, after it. And I think, and that your friend is a good example here, you get tunnel vision
Absolutely.
making these decisions.
Absolutely. But that's how the marketing is designed.
Sure.
They show you all these glamorous pictures and all these wonderful before and after photos, and somehow everybody convinces themselves that they're going to be one of these
Sure.
model patients. They're going to be an ambassador for this clinic. But based on the photos that I get on a nearly weekly basis from friends of friends in Pakistan and India who have gone to these clinics and now they have chunks of hair missing, or they have an infection or swelling in their ear, those sort of things are very, very concerning to me as a surgeon. Look, ultimately, my buddy and I, we went to Turkey, and the process was very similar to what everybody says it's going to be like. You're going to get there, they're going to wine and dine you, they're going to put you up in a nice hotel. The morning of the procedure, they'll pick you up from the hotel in this really luxurious Mercedes Sprinter. You're like, wow, everything is designed to really blow your mind. And when you finally get initially to the sales office is where they're going to take you first. You'll meet with a consultant, probably somebody very attractive, and then that's when your $2,000 procedure will start to incrementally become $2,500. Oh, but then you want the mesotherapy. That'll be another $1,000. Oh, but then you need this after care kit. That's going to be another $500. And before you know it, the price of your procedure has doubled, sometimes tripled. And, you know, you're really not in much of a position to negotiate with these people because they have the upper hand. Most sensible human beings don't want to rub somebody the wrong way that's about to perform surgery on them or have
it's a captured
an
audience, right? You're a captured audience.
That's exactly right.
And I think it's important to stress to people, most of these places have good intention. Whether they have the skill and ability to do the procedure is a different thing.
I think that's up for debate. Because what's a good intention?
True.
My good intention is to ensure that whenever I do surgery for someone, that I optimize the chances that after 1 year, they should look remarkably better than when they first met me. And I will do everything in my power to ensure that they don't look worse.
Yeah.
Principle of medicine, first do no harm.
Right.
And these places that market 6,000, 8,000 grafts, how can I believe that those places have good intentions? How many clinics in the United States offer packages of even 5,000 grafts,
Right.
7,000, 8,000 in one shot? None, because it's just not a realistic, attainable goal. And not for lack of effort or trying. It's just
It's not possible.
No.
Supply and demand, right?
That's exactly right.
Right.
And there's only so many follicles that can be harvested at one time. So ultimately, once my friend and I were done meeting with the sales consultant, they put you in another van. And then the van takes you to another clinic of their choice. My understanding is that they probably just take you to whatever clinic is available. It's just a sequence, right? They're slots. They're just filling them up. And then when you finally get there, I mean, when I was in the clinic, next to nobody spoke English, which was just a bit surprising to me. But I thought to myself, you know what? I'm a doctor. Let me at least, as a courtesy, introduce myself to another physician. So I asked to speak to the physician. And one of the texts is like, just waves to me. He's like, oh, that's a doctor, but he doesn't speak English. And she tried to convey that to me. And I was like, that's really strange. Because the guy outside who's selling ice cream to my son spoke enough English to be able to have a little bit of chit-chat. But you're telling me that this guy, who probably read Harrison's Principles of Internal Medicine, can't, converse with me in a little bit of English. Ultimately, that made me a little bit suspicious. Is there a doctor on board? And that's one of the things that really irks me about how other countries are allowed to operate. I mean, there have been instances, and I'm in a group with hundreds of surgeons from the ISHRS, and we've had moments where clinics in Turkey are claiming that their medical director is an Ivy League trained doctor who sits on the board in the ISHRS, and then all the doctors in the ISHRS group are asking each other, like, does anybody know this Ercon so-and-so?
Yeah.
And ultimately we realized that it was completely fabricated. For me, that's ultimately a reason to pause and think this through. Okay? You and I have talked about this. Why is FUE so popular in Turkey? Why?
Yeah.
I tell you why. Because you can't take a driver out of a cab and hand him a scalpel. But you can take a guy out of an ice cream shop, hand him a punch, and say, hey, you used to scoop out ice cream, now you're going to scoop out follicles. The appearance of performing FUE is very easy to do so.
And that's an interesting point. If you think about the numbers of procedures that are being done versus the number of trained physicians that, as a member of the ISHRS, that you know of there, the numbers don't add up. It's the same.
Absolutely not.
It's the same thing when we talk about all the photographs you see of guys sitting in airports, sitting on planes, having just had transplants. Take that number and then compare it to the number of before and after photographs you see versus what we're now starting to see with some of these patients coming into our clinics that have had over-harvested donor area or hair taken from different parts of the body that shouldn't have been put in certain areas, and the numbers don't always add up.
Look, I mean, that's something that I suspect. Unfortunately, I don't know who's a doctor in Turkey and who's not. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I do know. But the one thing that I do know is that when you go into these clinics, you're put into a room. The patients are put into rooms with multiple other patients. I've never seen that in the United States. In our clinic, we have multiple rooms. There's only one patient in each room, and the reason that it's been designed that way is to ensure that there's no chance of cross-contamination. When you're in a room with 10 other guys, how hard is it for a trainee to come in, grab a forceps from one tray, and then walk over to another patient? I truly hope to God that that never happens, but it makes you think, and then explains why there's such a large number of people that are able to get their procedures done. I mean, these places, they just operate like factories. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you need to keep in mind that the average Turk makes about $4,000 a day. Okay? You know what that breaks down to? About $10 or $15. How much do you think that this individual, who's never going to see you ever again, making 10 or 15, okay, let's say that they're paying them a little bit more, $20 a day. How much do you think that they are going to care about your final outcome?
And that's why the price is what it is.
Exactly.
Because it's all relative to the environment they're living in. And
it's hard to run one operating room at $4,000 a day, let alone give my staff $4,000 for a year.
Sure.
So, I mean, these are the things that we need to think about. And ultimately, I was happy that when my friend's procedure was done, the team was honest enough. And they knew I was a doctor. So I think that they were extra transparent. They were able to get roughly around 1,300 grafts. A little more than I thought I would have gotten. And the reason they were able to get that is because they harvested as heavily as possible throughout the donor, the occiput, the temples, and then took hairs from his beard.
What's the efficacy of the beard here?
So, that's not the right question to be asking. I think that the beard hair has to be used very, very carefully because this life cycle of the beard hair is very different. It could be in the telogen phase for a much longer period of time. So if you were to go ahead and transplant a chunk of beard hair into your scalp, it's possible that if they're close enough together and they all go into telogen simultaneously, you'll be left with a bald spot there.
Right. So, and obviously the texture of the hair is different, both above the surface and below the surface. So I would assume the transection rate is potentially is higher than a hair from the scalp. Is that fair to say? Or?
I'm sure it is.
Yeah. How's your friend doing now?
I'm glad that you asked because ultimately there were two things that I wanted to see. I wanted to see how the outcome was and him. I wanted to look at the before and after photos, the photos from the day of his procedure versus a year later. And sure enough, there's next to no difference.
Right.
And then him and I sat down, did a little bit of math. Okay? He was supposed to pay $2,000, but then when you include all the upcharges, all the time that he lost from being away from work. And some people justify it by saying, well, it's a vacation. Okay, so let's just stick to the numbers that they actually paid to the clinic. Maybe the cost of, hotels and things like that and food and whatever was associated with it. All in all, when you divide those 1,300 grafts into the amount he paid, it still came out to about $4 a graft. He could have gone to a clinic nearby where he lives and done the same procedure and then gone back to work a day or two later. So you know, that's the reality of how these things happen. And his story is a lot better than the other stories that I'm hearing of. He's very fortunate that he had no complications. God bless him. I hope nobody does.
Sure.
But my experience, and this happens all too often, especially since I'm a member of the South Asian community, I have a lot of friends that are Pakistani, Indian, some guys from the Middle East. Their friends will go to Turkey, have a procedure, because one of their uncles had a procedure and had a great outcome. Now these guys go there, they come back, they have chunks of hair missing. They have blisters in places they shouldn't be having them. I mean, sometimes they ask me, Doc, what is this? Am I going to get better? And I don't even know how to respond because these are things I've never even seen.
Chunks of hair missing, just to elaborate for the listeners, viewers out there, it's over harvesting, right? So it's thinking about the donor in the back and taking out too much. So now you can visually see that you have an uneven patchy look to the donor area on the back because I've taken too many follicles per square centimetre.
Sure.
Maybe touch on that a little bit, the importance of the donor area and how maybe that's overlooked in the hands of an experienced physician and team.
So as a surgeon, you know, I think what really sets me apart from a lot of the other physicians out there is that I focus heavily on donor management. When we're extracting a follicle, I want to make sure that there are at least 4 to 5 hairs surrounding. So this way I know that I'm always staying in the range of about 15 to 20% of the grafts that are being extracted at a time. And fortunately, despite having done thousands of procedures, some in which I've been a little bit more aggressive, I've never had a patient coming back to me saying, hey doc, I'm missing a chunk of hair missing here. And you know, that only happens when the doctor has the foresight to be cognizant of how many follicles you'll need to ensure that your donor always looks aesthetically as dense as it was before the procedure. These are the things that separate, I think, doctors who really, really care, who are passionate, and want to do the right thing by the patient versus the surgeons that are just looking to squeeze out as many follicles and to make as much money as possible out of an individual. I think ultimately those doctors that are overly aggressive, whether they're in the US or in Turkey, are going to regret their decisions.
Right.
Because the reason I've been successful for 10 years is because I tried to do the right thing every step of the way.
The other thing we talked about on a previous episode, sometimes FUE is not right for everybody. Right, we're utilising a combination of different techniques now. Despite what some people think, the newer forms of the FUT procedures with the amazing closures we can do might be right for somebody. In Turkey, it's all FUE. So there's no consideration. Again, this comes back to donor area management over the lifetime of the patient. Maybe an FUE is not right for everybody. Maybe FUT is not right for everybody. So having all those quivers in your bow, so to speak, or those arrows, is very important.
It always lets you do the right thing by the patient.
Sure.
And I'd like to rephrase your comment, and rather than saying FUE is not the right thing for a patient, I'd like to think that it's not necessarily optimal.
Optimal, right.
Okay,
Right.
I mean, yeah, I can take a punch and extract hair from just about everybody. But just yesterday, we did surgery on a gentleman who came to us. He had had an FUE procedure done 2 years ago with a famous hair transplant surgeon in Miami. And when I saw his hair, I saw how fine his hair was and the color. It was like platinum. When you shave him down, you couldn't even see it. And I said to myself, and my comments to my tech were, there is no way those hairs are going to survive a punch rotating at 5,000 RPM.
Sure.
I wouldn't have done it. Sure. That's why we offered him the strip procedure.
It came out fantastic.
Amazing. The density was unreal.
Yeah.
And ultimately, we ended up getting him nearly 9,000 hairs. You can only do that with the strip procedure, and he really needed it.
Yeah, and that's a classic example of a hybrid approach, essentially, for this particular patient.
Yeah.
I guess finishing up on the Turkey thing and the psychology around that, it's not just about the transplant. We talked in earlier episodes about the global approach. And a global approach is not just about hair loss being a marathon, not a sprint. It's also about having a connection with a clinic, so the clinic is there for you afterwards. A big part of what we do, we have a 12-month follow-up process. And we talked before jokingly about the number of text messages that I get and calls we get. I've been a patient. The value of that and feeling comfortable and putting your mind at ease is huge. And when you go overseas and come back, there's none of that.
That's what I tell prospective patients. That look, these places will take your money. They'll even make it appear like they're doing an FUE. But ultimately, when you have a problem, who are you going to call? Do you think that the consultant's going to spend their time once they've captured your money and you're halfway across the world to help you? If you experience donor effluvium, if you have really profound folliculitis, and these sort of things happen. I mean, and I think that's something that people really need to think about. And ultimately, if you go to a clinic that exhausts all your donor, you're not going to be left with any more options. Right. Think about that.
Yeah, yeah. Dr. Contractor, thank you. Fantastic information. We could talk for another 2 hours on this topic, of course. I know
I'll be billing you for that.
Yeah, you're very passionate about it. Email us at info@WeGrowHairIndy.com with your questions or topics you want to cover. Head to our website to schedule your free consultation with one of our experts. I'm Darren Andrews. Thank you for listening. Catch you next time.